Hey guys, settle in. Find the position your body wants to rest in, and let whatever you carry today begin to set itself down. Tonight we are following a young woman through a Victorian courtship, from the first time a gentleman asks her to dance at a country ball, all the way to a quiet morning in white silk and orange blossoms. It is a story about the 1,000 small rules that governed falling in love in 1860. It is also about the scratch of a name written on a dance card, a calling card left face down on a silver tray, the particular way a mother watches her daughter from across a candlelit room, white gloves unbuttoned one button at the wrist, a question asked so quietly that only two people hear it, and the long, still moment before a church door opens. There is nothing here you need to follow closely. The story moves at the pace of breathing, and it is meant to carry you gently towards sleep. If these quiet journeys help you rest, you are warmly welcome to follow the channel, so that another evening like this one can find you when you need it. A few words left below about where you are listening from tonight helps others discover these stories too. There is no hurry to do any of it. It can wait until morning. So let your eyes close if they wish to. Let your breathing slow, and when you're ready, we will step into a warm room full of candlelight and music on an evening in late spring. The year is 1860. And in a quiet market town called Wenford, there lives a young woman named Penelope Graves. She is 20 years old. She has brown hair pinned carefully away from her face, a dress that took 3 fittings to get right, and a feeling in her chest that she does not yet have a word for. This is the spring she has been presented to society, which means, in plain language, that she is now allowed to be looked at, allowed to be spoken to by men who are not her father. Allowed for the first time to stand in a ballroom and be asked to dance and to say yes, and to place her gloved hand on the arm of a stranger, and to move in time with him across a polished floor and to feel something, and to show absolutely none of it on her face. That is the world we are stepping into tonight. A world where falling in love was not a private matter. It was a performance watched by everyone, governed by rules so precise that a single misstep could undo months of careful work. There were rules about how long you could look at a man before it became improper. Rules about what you could say to him and what you could never say. Rules about who left a calling card first and when, and whether the corner was folded down and what the fold meant. Rules about how close you could sit to him, and whether you could sit beside him at all, and what it signified if his mother paid your mother a visit on a Tuesday morning rather than a Thursday. And underneath all of those rules, there was a girl trying to figure out whether what she felt was real. We are going to walk beside her through all of it. From the first evening she catches the eye of a man named Frederick Carlyle across a candlelit room, through the weeks of careful conversation and morning visits, and sideways glances in church, through the slow, almost unbearable stretch of waiting to find out whether he will speak, through the quiet afternoon when he does, all the way to a morning when she stands in her bedroom in a white dress with orange blossoms in her hair, and the church bells have not yet begun to ring. I think what draws me to this story is something very simple. We live now in a world where you can tell someone you love them in a text message sent at 2 a.m. But there was a time when the same feeling had to travel through layers of silk and whalebone, and etiquette and silence, and it still got through. It always got through. The rules could not stop it. They never could. They only made it quieter and slower, and in some strange way more beautiful for the waiting. Tonight, we are going to feel what that waiting felt like. So let us begin on a Friday evening in late May, in the year 1860. The candles at Ravensgrange have been lit for an hour already, and the carriages are beginning to arrive. The candles at Ravensgrange have been burning for over an hour by the time the Graves family carriage pulls into the line of waiting vehicles on the gravel drive. It is a Friday evening in late May, and the air that comes through the half-open window carries the scent of cut grass and warm stone. Inside the carriage, Penelope sits with her hands folded in her lap, her white kid gloves buttoned to the wrist and her fan resting across her knee. Beside her, Henrietta Graves adjusts the clasp of her own cloak and says nothing. She does not need to. The instructions have already been given earlier in the evening in the bedroom while Sally pinned the last spray of small white flowers into Penelope's hair. Imagine arriving at a place like this for nearly the first time. You have been to smaller gatherings before, evening parties where the guests numbered fewer than 30, and the dancing, if there was any, happened in a parlour with the carpet still down. But this is different. Ravensgrange is a proper country house with a proper ballroom, and tonight it has been transformed into something that looks, from the outside, like a lantern set down in the middle of the dark countryside. Every window on the ground floor is bright. The carpet in the ballroom has been taken up 2 days ago, and the bare wooden floor beneath has been waxed until it gleams under the light of what must be 200 candles. The effect, when you step through the doorway, is almost disorienting. The entire room has been dressed in flowers. There are wreaths of greenery looped along the walls, baskets of roses and peonies set into every corner, and flowering plants arranged in moss-covered pots along the windowsills. At the far end of the room, a screen covered in ivy and white blossoms hides the musicians from view, so that the music seems to come from nowhere in particular, as if the room itself is humming. It is a deliberate trick. The hostess has arranged it so that the sight of men hunched over their instruments will not break the spell of the evening. You hear only the violin, the piano, the low voice of a violoncello, floating out from behind the greenery as though the flowers themselves are singing. I find this detail quietly extraordinary. Someone, probably the lady of the house, spent real thought on making the source of the music invisible. She understood that beauty is partly about not seeing the effort behind it. That is a small philosophy, tucked inside a decorating decision, and I think it says something true about the whole world we are stepping into tonight. Everything in this room has been arranged so that nothing looks arranged. The candles burn as though they lit themselves. The flowers bloom as though they grew here. And every person in this room is performing a version of the same trick with their own body, their own face, their own voice. Penelope's first duty, upon entering the ballroom, is not to look around. It is not to find a seat or to search the room for anyone she knows. Her first duty is to speak to the hostess. This is an unbreakable rule. You greet the woman who invited you. You offer a few warm words. You do not linger, because she has 100 other guests to welcome, but you do not rush, because that would suggest you have somewhere more important to be. It is a small performance of gratitude, and it must look effortless. Henrietta leads the way. She knows the hostess, a Mrs. Pemberton, and the two women exchange pleasantries with the practiced ease of people who have been doing this for decades. Penelope stands beside her mother, smiles when she is introduced, and says something quiet and appropriate that she will not remember 5 minutes from now. Then they move into the room, and the evening begins in earnest. A waiter stands near the entrance with a silver tray. On it are small double cards, each one bearing the evening's full sequence of dances on one side, and a column of blank spaces on the other, with a tiny pencil attached by a ribbon. Penelope takes one. She holds it carefully, the way you might hold a letter you have not yet opened. This card is the architecture of her entire evening. Every dance she accepts will be written here, in pencil, in the hand of the gentleman who asks her. By the end of the night, the card will be a record of who sought her company and who did not. There is something about this small object that I want to pause on for a moment. A dance card is, in one sense, nothing more than a schedule. But in another sense, it is a document of desire, written in real time by the people who feel it. Every name penciled into those blank spaces is a tiny declaration. I asked for her, she said yes, and every blank space left unfilled at the end of the night is its own quiet answer. We do not have anything quite like this anymore, this physical record of who wanted to be close to you on a given evening, and I think there is something both lovely and a little painful about it. The first strain of music is a march. It fills the room with a steady, measured rhythm, and the guests begin to move in a slow promenade around the edges of the floor. This is not yet dancing. It is a way of settling everyone into the room, of letting the candlelight catch the silk and muslin, of allowing the evening to find its pace. After the march comes the first quadrille and then a waltz, and the dances will continue in this way, 21 or 22 in all, with an interval of 10 minutes between each one, until the supper is announced sometime around midnight. Penelope is wearing a dress of white muslin over a pale silk lining. It is thin and light, as the rules require for an unmarried woman at a ball: no satin, no velvet, Those fabrics belong to married women, to women who have already been chosen and can afford to look substantial. An unmarried girl must look like something the breeze could carry away. Her hair is dressed with the small white flowers Sally pinned in earlier, and she carries her fan in one hand and a lace-trimmed handkerchief in the other. These three things, the gloves, the fan and the handkerchief, are considered essential. Without them, she would be as conspicuously underdressed as if she had arrived without her shoes. Now imagine this. You're standing near the edge of the room, beside your mother, holding your little pencil and card, watching the quadrille form its first set. A gentleman you have never met approaches. He has been introduced to you by the hostess or by a mutual acquaintance, and he asks whether you might do him the honour of dancing the next waltz. At a private ball like this one, you cannot refuse an introduction. It would be an insult to your hostess, an implication that her guests are not fit company. So you accept the introduction. You accept the dance. You hand him your card and he writes his name in the next open space and hands it back with a small bow. That is the whole transaction. It takes less than a minute. And yet your heart may be beating as though you have just run the length of the garden. The gentleman's name is Frederick Carlyle, and he is 27 years old. He has dark hair, a quiet manner, and the kind of face that does not demand your attention from across the room, but holds it very steadily once you are standing close enough to speak. He is the second son of a family Henrietta knows by reputation, but has never met in person. He writes his name on Penelope's card in a hand that is neat and unhurried, and when he hands the card back to her, he meets her eyes for just a moment longer than the gesture requires. That is all. That is the first indication of preference, as the etiquette books would call it. A glance held 1 second longer than necessary. It is so small that Penelope herself is not sure whether she imagined it. The waltz begins and Frederick offers his arm. Penelope places her gloved hand on it, lightly, and they walk together to the floor. There is a particular way you must hold yourself during a waltz, a particular distance between your body and your partner's, and that distance is not negotiable. Too close and you're improper. Too far and you're cold, or worse, afraid. The correct distance is the width of a comfortable breath, close enough to feel the warmth of another person's presence, far enough that no part of you touches any part of him, except where your hands meet, and where your hand rests on his shoulder. They dance. The violoncello hums behind the screen of ivy. The candles flicker in the draught from the open windows, and the room smells of beeswax and roses, and the faint, clean warmth of freshly polished wood. Penelope follows Frederick's lead through the turns of the waltz, and she does what every young woman in this room has been trained to do since childhood. She keeps her face pleasant. She keeps her posture straight. She keeps her conversation light and general, and entirely free of anything that might be mistaken for intimacy. This is the part that astonishes me every time I think about it. She's dancing with a man she finds attractive. She's close enough to see the thread count of his waistcoat, and the rules require her to behave as though she feels nothing whatsoever. Not cold, not warm, not interested, not uninterested. Neutral. Kind of composed pleasantness that reveals absolutely nothing about what is actually happening inside her chest. I do not know whether this is admirable or cruel. Perhaps it is both. Perhaps that is the whole point of the evening. At the end of the waltz, Frederick conducts Penelope back to her seat. He bows. She inclines her head. He releases her from further attendance because the etiquette is clear on this point. A gentleman escorts his partner to her chair and then withdraws so that she is free for the next invitation, and so that he does not give the appearance of monopolizing her company. He does not linger. He does not say anything that might suggest he wishes to stay. He simply bows and turns and walks back across the gleaming floor to the other side of the room. Penelope watches him go. She does this carefully, from the corner of her eye, without turning her head. Because there is a rule about this too. You do not watch a man walk away from you in a ballroom. You do not let anyone in the room see you watching. The evening continues. There are more dances, more names written on the card in various hands. Penelope dances every other set, which is the recommended pace, enough to show that she is enjoying herself, not so much that she risks appearing flushed or overheated. During the intervals, she sits with Henrietta and drinks a glass of lemonade and holds her fan open in her lap. Frederick dances with other women. Penelope does not track which ones, or how many, or whether he holds any of them at the same distance he held her. She does not do this because it would be obvious, and because she has been taught very carefully that being obvious is the one thing a young woman cannot afford to be. But here is what the etiquette books do not mention because they cannot. They cannot legislate the inside of a person's mind. They can tell you where to put your hands and how long to hold a glance and when to sit down and when to stand up. But they cannot stop you from replaying a single moment over and over in your head while the rest of the evening moves around you like water around a stone. They cannot stop you from noticing, without meaning to, that the gentleman on the far side of the room has not yet written his name on anyone else's card for the 14th dance. They cannot stop you from wondering whether that means anything at all. It is nearly midnight when the march announcing supper fills the room, and the guests begin to pair off and move toward the dining room. Frederick appears beside Penelope's chair. He asks, with the same quiet courtesy as before, whether she would allow him to escort her to supper. She accepts. She places her hand on his arm again. They walk together through the doorway into a room lit with even more candles, where a long table is laid with cold meats and iced confections and towers of fruit, and waiters stand ready along the walls. In the supper room, everyone stands. There are no chairs. The waiters pass plates of food to each gentleman present, and each gentleman offers what he has received to the lady beside him, and the entire meal is conducted on your feet, holding a plate in one hand and a glass in the other, making conversation over the sound of 100 other conversations happening at once. It is not intimate. It is not meant to be. But Penelope is standing next to Frederick Carlyle, and his sleeve is close enough to hers that she can feel the warmth of it without touching, and the whole loud, bright, standing-up supper feels, to her, like the quietest room she has ever been in. They speak about nothing of consequence, and the weather this past week, a book of engravings that has recently been published, the quality of the orchestra. These are permitted topics, safe and neutral, the kind of conversation that could be overheard by anyone without raising a single eyebrow. And yet something is happening beneath the surface of these ordinary words, something that neither of them acknowledges and neither of them can stop. It is the feeling of being listened to, very carefully, by someone who appears to be talking about the weather. I think this is something that has not changed in 160 years. The words we use when we are first falling in love are almost always the wrong ones. They are too small, too ordinary, too far from what we actually mean. But the listening is real. The listening is always real, and both people know it. That is the secret the etiquette books could never quite govern, no matter how many rules they wrote. You can control what someone says. You cannot control how carefully they hear it. The supper ends. The dancing resumes. Penelope does not dance with Frederick again. The rule is clear, and it is one that Henrietta has spoken aloud more than once. You must not accept too many dances from a single gentleman, or your names will be linked, and once they are linked, the linking cannot easily be undone. So Penelope dances with other men, pleasant and unforgettable, and Frederick dances with other women, and the evening turns slowly toward its end. Before the last two sets, Henrietta touches Penelope's elbow. It is time to leave. A well-bred woman does not remain in a ballroom until the final dance has been played. She leaves while the evening is still alive, while there are still sets to be danced, so that her departure looks like a choice rather than a reluctance to let go of something she has enjoyed. To stay until the very end would suggest that she is unaccustomed to such pleasures, that she is savouring every last moment because she does not know when another will come. So Penelope stands. She collects her cloak from the dressing room. She speaks to the hostess one more time, a few words of thanks, a smile, and then she is in the carriage again, and the gravel is crunching under the wheels, and the windows of Ravensgrange are growing smaller behind her, and the night air is cool on her face, and she is holding her dance card in her lap, and she has not looked at it yet. She will look at it later. In her room, by the light of a single candle, after Sally has unpinned the flowers from her hair and hung the white muslin dress and closed the door behind her, she will hold the card close to the flame and read the names written there in various hands, some careful, some hasty, and she will find the one that is neat and unhurried, and she will run her thumb across it very lightly, and she will not know what she is feeling, not yet, but she will know that something has begun. The candle burns low. The card rests on the nightstand. The house is quiet. Penelope wakes the next morning to the sound of Sally drawing the curtains. The light comes in grey and soft, the kind of early summer light that has not yet decided whether it belongs to morning or to something still left over from the night before. The room smells faintly of the flowers that were in her hair, the ones Sally unpinned a few hours ago and set in a small dish of water on the dresser. They are already beginning to wilt. Their petals are curling inward as though trying to hold on to whatever they had been part of. If you have ever come home from an evening where something unnamed began, you know this feeling. The room looks the same as it did before you left. The bed is the same, the washstand, the mirror, the chair by the window where your shawl was draped before Sally folded it away. Nothing has changed, and yet you are looking at all of it through a different lens, as though the world has shifted a quarter of an inch to the left while you were not paying attention, and now everything is slightly, pleasantly, disturbingly unfamiliar. Sally brings warm water in a basin and lays out a fresh chemise, and Penelope sits at the dressing table and lets her hair be brushed. It is a morning like any other, except that it is not, except that the dance card is still on the nightstand, and Penelope has already looked at it twice since she woke, and each time her eyes found the same name, written in the same neat hand, and each time she felt the same small involuntary tightening in her chest that she does not yet have a word for. This is the moment the etiquette books would call the first disruption of the feeling she has grown accustomed to. That phrase is worth pausing on. A disturbance, not a joy, not an excitement, not a thrill. A disturbance. As though what she is feeling is something that has gone wrong with the ordinary machinery of her emotional life, a gear slipping out of place, a clock running a few seconds too fast. And in a way, that is exactly how it was understood. The first sign that a young woman had noticed a man's attention was not treated as a beginning. It was treated as a risk. The books of the period are remarkably clear on this point. When a young woman first becomes aware that a gentleman has shown her some mark of preference, the feeling she is most likely to experience is not happiness. It is shame, a hot, confusing, almost physical shame, not because she has done anything wrong, but because she's been seen. Someone has looked at her and found her worth looking at. And that knowledge, that awareness of being perceived as a woman rather than a girl, lands on her like a weight she did not ask to carry. She blushes, she looks away, she feels exposed in a way that has nothing to do with what she's wearing and everything to do with what she's becoming. I think about this often and I am never entirely sure what to make of it. On one hand, there is something profoundly sad about a culture that taught its young women to feel ashamed of being desired. On the other hand, I wonder whether that shame was not, in its way, a kind of honesty. Because the truth is that being noticed by someone you might care about is terrifying. It is terrifying now, and it was terrifying then. The difference is that in 1860 the terror was given a name and a set of instructions. You will feel this. Here is what to do with it. Here is how to carry it without letting it carry you. We have no such instructions anymore. We are left to figure it out alone, scrolling through messages at midnight, wondering what a 3-second delay in a reply might mean. I am not sure our way is better. I am not sure theirs was either. But at least they admitted that it was hard. Henrietta comes into the room while Sally is finishing with the hair. She does not knock. Mothers of this period do not knock on their daughters' bedroom doors because the door, like everything else in the house, belongs to the mother's domain. She sits down on the edge of the bed and says something pleasant about the evening. The music was very fine, the flowers were well arranged. Mrs. Pemberton had done an excellent job with the supper. She does not mention Frederick Carlyle. She does not ask whether Penelope enjoyed any particular dance or whether any particular gentleman was agreeable. She simply talks in the same even, unhurried tone she uses when discussing the household accounts or the menu for Sunday dinner, and she watches. This is a mother doing her work, and her work at this moment is to observe without appearing to observe. Henrietta is looking for signs, a change in colour when a certain name is mentioned, a new brightness in the eyes, a tendency to steer the conversation toward last night when it would naturally drift toward today. She is reading her daughter the way a farmer reads the sky, not for what it is showing now, but for what it is about to become. And the extraordinary thing is that Penelope knows this. She knows she's being read. And so the morning becomes a kind of performance, the second performance in 12 hours, in which a young woman must feel one thing and show another. The rules governing this performance are unwritten but absolute. You must not appear excited. You must not mention the gentleman's name unless your mother mentions it first. And even then, you must speak of him with the same mild, pleasant indifference you would use to describe any other guest. You must not replay the evening aloud. You must not ask whether anyone noticed how long he spoke with you at supper, or whether his name appeared on anyone else's card, or whether his family has been to Wenford before. You must behave as though the evening was agreeable but unremarkable. A pleasant way to pass a Friday, nothing more. You must show nothing. And underneath this composure you must do something far more difficult. You must try to understand what you are actually feeling, and you must do it without any help. This is the part of the etiquette that I find most demanding, and also, in a strange way, most respectful. The books do not tell a young woman what to feel. They do not say that she should love this man or reject that one. What they say, again and again, is that she must learn to analyse her own heart before she lets anyone else see inside it. She must ask herself whether what she is feeling is real attraction or mere vanity, whether her interest in this particular gentleman is based on his character or simply on the flattering fact that he noticed her. She must distinguish between the pleasure of being admired and the deeper, quieter pull of genuine regard. And she must do all of this internally, silently, without confiding in her friends, because the books are very firm on this point too. A young woman who discusses her romantic feelings with other girls is playing a dangerous game. The danger is not gossip exactly. The gossip is certainly part of it. The deeper danger is that by talking about what she feels, she makes it real before she has decided whether it should be. Words have weight. Once you have told someone that you think a certain gentleman is handsome or kind or that you liked the way he held your hand during the waltz, those words belong to the world and not to you anymore. They can be repeated, misquoted, exaggerated, turned into a story you did not mean to tell. And in a small community like Wenford, where everyone knows everyone and every piece of social information travels through drawing rooms like water through sand, a single careless sentence can become an expectation, and an expectation can become a trap. So Penelope says nothing. She sits at the dressing table and lets Sally arrange her hair for the day, a simpler style than last night, pinned back with plain combs. She puts on a morning dress of pale grey cotton, because a young woman does not wear her best clothes at home unless she is expecting visitors, and Penelope is not expecting visitors. She goes downstairs to breakfast with Henrietta and her father, William Graves, a quiet, solid man who asks no questions about the ball, because he trusts his wife to manage these things, and because his own memories of courtship are so distant that he has forgotten what it felt like to be in the middle of one. Breakfast is eggs, toast, a pot of tea. The dining room faces east, and the morning light falls in long rectangles across the tablecloth. Penelope eats slowly. She is thinking, but she is thinking in the way the books require her to think, which is to say she is thinking without reaching any conclusions. She is turning the evening over in her mind the way you might turn a stone over in your hand, feeling its weight, noticing its colour, without deciding whether to keep it or put it down. There is a particular temptation that the etiquette books warn against at this stage, and it is not the temptation you might expect. It is not the temptation to fall in love too quickly, or to let your heart run ahead of your judgment. It is the temptation of vanity. The first time a gentleman pays you particular attention, the most immediate danger is not that you will love him, but that you will love the feeling of being loved, that you will become intoxicated by the idea that someone wants you, and that this intoxication will cloud your ability to see the person clearly. You will start to believe that because he admires you, he must be admirable. You will mistake his interest for his character. I think this is one of the shrewdest observations in the entire book, and it is one that has not aged a single day. The pleasure of being chosen is so powerful, so rare, so deeply satisfying to something inside us that we do not like to examine too closely, that it can make us stupid. It can make us generous with qualities that the other person has not earned. It can make us see depth where there is only persistence, kindness where there is only strategy, love where there is only an appetite. The Victorians did not invent this trap. They just named it more honestly than we do. They called it vanity, and they warned their daughters about it the way they warned them about slippery floors and poorly lit staircases as a real and present danger that could send you tumbling if you were not paying attention. The other trap is the opposite of vanity, and the books name this one too. It is ridicule. Sometimes, when a young woman first becomes conscious that a gentleman has shown her preference, the shame of being noticed is so acute that she tries to escape it by mocking the man who caused it. She laughs at him. She imitates his mannerisms to her friends. She makes small, cutting observations about his clothes or his conversation or the way he held his fork at supper. She does this not because she dislikes him necessarily, but because laughter is the fastest way to put distance between yourself and a feeling you are not ready to face. It is a defense. But it is a defense that can do terrible damage, because once you have ridiculed someone in public, you cannot easily take it back. If you later discover that you care for him after all, you have already sown doubt about his worthiness in the minds of everyone who heard you laugh. And if he hears of it, you may have lost him entirely. Penelope does neither of these things. She does not flutter with vanity. She does not reach for ridicule. She simply sits at the breakfast table and eats her toast and looks out the window at the garden, where the roses are just beginning to open, and she lets the question exist without answering it. What do I feel? She does not know yet. The books would say that this is correct, this is wisdom, this is the behaviour of a young woman who understands that the most important decisions of her life deserve more than one evening's evidence. After breakfast, Penelope goes into the small parlour and takes up her needlework. It is a cushion cover she has been working on for weeks, a pattern of ivy leaves in green and cream thread, and she stitches slowly, making each stitch with the same unhurried care that someone at the other end of this story used when writing his name on a card. The needlework is not a distraction. It is a discipline. It gives her hand something to do while her mind does its private, invisible work, and it gives anyone who might walk into the room the impression that she is occupied with exactly the kind of quiet domestic task that a young woman ought to be occupied with on a Saturday morning. There is no idleness here, and there must be none. Idleness would leave room for daydreaming, and daydreaming would show on her face. And her face is not her own this morning. It belongs to whoever might be watching. Henrietta is in the room too, reading a letter. She glances at Penelope from time to time over the top of the page, the way you might glance at a kettle you have put on the stove, not because you expect it to boil yet, but because you want to know when it starts to simmer. Penelope feels the glances but does not return them. She keeps her eyes on her needlework. The ivy leaves grow, stitch by stitch, and the morning passes, and neither of them mentions the ball. I want to say something about this silence, because I believe it may be the most eloquent thing in the entire chapter. There are two women in this room, a mother and a daughter, and both of them are thinking about the same thing, and neither of them is saying a word about it. This is not coldness. It is not distance. It is a shared understanding that some things must be approached slowly, the way you approach a bird you do not want to startle. Henrietta does not ask, because asking would be a kind of pressure, and pressure at this stage could push her daughter toward a decision that has not yet been earned. Penelope does not speak because speaking would make the feeling real before she has had time to test it, to turn it over, to see whether it holds up in the plain light of a Saturday morning when the candles are out and the music is gone, and the only sound is the tick of a clock and the small rhythmic pull of thread through cloth. There is a word for what Penelope is doing, though she would not have used it. She is being careful, not cautious, which implies fear, but careful, which implies love. She is handling her own heart the way you handle something fragile and valuable, something you have picked up in a shop and are not yet sure you can afford. She is holding it up to the light, she is looking for cracks, and she is doing this alone because in 1860, a young woman's heart is ultimately her own responsibility, and no one else, not her mother, not her friends, not the gentleman himself, can tell her what is inside it. The morning drifts toward noon. Sally comes in to ask whether Penelope would like anything from the kitchen. Henrietta folds her letter and goes to speak with the cook about dinner. The house settles into its ordinary rhythms, and Penelope is left alone with her needlework and her thoughts on the dance card upstairs on the nightstand, which she has not looked at again since breakfast, which she will not look at again till tonight, which she is thinking about constantly. Outside the window, the garden is bright with late spring light. A blackbird lands on the stone wall and sits there for a moment, turning its head this way and that, as though it too is trying to decide something. Then it flies away, and the wall is empty, and the ivy leaves on the cushion cover grow by one more stitch. And the question that Penelope is carrying inside her, the question that every young woman in every age has carried after the first evening when a stranger became something more than a stranger, remains unanswered. What do I feel? She will not know for weeks yet, but she is asking. The clock strikes 12. The house is still. 10 days after the ball at Ravensgrange, there is an evening party at the home of a family called Pemberton, the same family that hosted the ball, though this is a smaller affair. Fewer than 40 guests. The drawing room is lit, but the doors to the garden are open, and the warm air of early June moves through the house carrying the smell of jasmine and cut lavender. There is no dancing tonight. This is a conversational evening, a gathering where the entertainment is talk itself, where the entire purpose of the room is to bring people together and let them speak. Penelope arrives with Henrietta. She is wearing a dress of soft blue with a white collar and white cuffs, and her hair is pinned simply. She does not look as though she has spent any particular time on her appearance, and that, of course, is the point. A young woman at an evening party must look presentable without looking as though she is trying to attract attention. The line between well-dressed and conspicuous is as thin as a silk thread, and it must never be crossed. The first thing she does upon entering the room is speak to the hostess. This is the same rule as at the ball, and it applies to every social occasion without exception. You greet the woman who invited you, you thank her, you exchange a few pleasant words, and then you move into the room and find your place among the other guests. It is a ritual so familiar by now that Penelope performs it without thinking, the way you might turn a key in a lock you have opened 1,000 times. But tonight is different from other evenings because Frederick Carlyle is here. He is standing near the fireplace with 2 other gentlemen holding a glass, and when Penelope enters the room, he does not look at her immediately. He finishes his sentence, turns his head, and inclines it very slightly in her direction. It is a greeting so restrained that a person standing 3 feet away might not notice it. Penelope returns it with a nod of equal restraint, and then she sits down beside Henrietta on a settee near the window and opens her fan. Imagine what it is like to be in a room with a person you are beginning to think about constantly, and to have no language for what you feel, and to know that every word you say and every glance you give is being watched by people who will form opinions based on what they see. Imagine that the only way you can communicate with this person is through conversation, and that conversation itself is governed by a set of rules so detailed and so demanding that it takes years of training to follow them properly. The rules of conversation in 1860 are not suggestions. They are laws, and they are especially strict when the conversation is between a young woman and a gentleman she does not know well. The first rule is this: you must speak clearly, in a voice that is neither too loud nor too soft. There is a precise volume that a lady is expected to maintain, a middle tone that carries warmth without carrying across the room. Too loud and you are vulgar, too quiet and you are mumbling. which suggests either shyness or something to hide. The correct volume is the one that reaches the ear of your companion and no further, a sound that belongs only to the space between two people. The second rule governs what you may talk about. You must be interesting without being intense. You may discuss books, but only certain kinds. Travel, music, the natural world, recent exhibitions, the weather, in its more poetic aspects. You may not discuss anything related to money, illness, politics, or religion. You may not discuss the personal affairs of anyone who is not in the room, and you may not discuss the personal affairs of anyone who is in the room. You may not ask a professional gentleman about his work, because men who are visiting a drawing room in the evening are there for recreation, not to be interrogated about their daily business. A clergyman does not wish to discuss his sermons. A lawyer does not wish to discuss his clients. A doctor does not wish to describe the diseases he has treated that afternoon. These men have come to forget the details of their occupations, and a young woman who presses them on such subjects is committing an act of social cruelty. I find this particular rule fascinating because it reveals something about how the Victorians understood the purpose of social life. Conversation was not meant to exchange information, it was meant to create pleasure. The goal was not to learn something new about the person sitting beside you, but to make the time you spent together feel light and warm and free of the weight that both of you carried during the rest of the day. In that sense, the rules of conversation were really rules of kindness, even when they did not look like it. They were designed to protect people from being cornered, from being embarrassed, from being made to perform in ways they had not chosen. You could argue that this was superficial. You could also argue that it was generous. The third rule is about listening. A good conversationalist does not only speak well, she listens with her full attention. She does not allow her eyes to wander around the room while her companion is talking. She does not glance at other guests, or check the clock on the mantelpiece, or follow the movements of someone more interesting on the far side of the room. She gives the person in front of her the gift of her complete presence, and she does this regardless of whether the person is fascinating or dull, because the point is not what is being said, the point is the courtesy of hearing it. Closely linked to listening is the rule about interruption. You must never interrupt another person who's speaking, not to correct them, not to finish their sentence, not to add a detail they have forgotten. You must wait until they have completed their thought and then, only then, offer your own. The books are forceful on this point, almost angry about it, which makes me think it was a common failing even then. If someone is telling you a story, you do not jump in with questions at every pause. You do not say when and where and what happened next before they have had time to tell you. You let the story belong to the person who's telling it, and you trust that they will arrive in their own time at the destination they intended. This is patience dressed up as politeness, but it is real patience, the kind that requires you to sit with your curiosity and not act on it, and I think that kind of patience is rarer now than it has ever been. And there is a deeper layer to this rule that the books do not quite name, but that Penelope understands instinctively. Listening is the most intimate thing you can do in public. It is more intimate than dancing, more intimate than touching gloves, more intimate than anything that involves the body. When you truly listen to someone, you're saying without words that they matter, that what they think is worth your time, that you're not merely waiting for them to stop talking so that you can say the thing you've been planning to say since they started. And in a world where a young woman is not allowed to say what she actually feels, listening is the only honest currency she has. Penelope listens to Frederick Carlyle. She listens to him the way the books have taught her to listen, with her head tilted very slightly, her eyes steady, her expression attentive but not eager. He is talking about a walk he took last week along the river near his family's house, a long walk on a warm afternoon, and the way the light changed as it came through the leaves. It is exactly the kind of topic that the rules allow. It is pleasant, it is harmless, it's the sort of thing you could repeat to anyone without consequence. And yet the way he tells it slowly and carefully, choosing each word the way you might choose a stone to skip across water, suggests that he is doing more than making conversation. He's showing her how his mind works. He is letting us see the inside of his attention, which is quiet and precise and unhurried, and this, in 1860, is one of the most daring things a man can do. She must not show that she notices this. She must respond with something equally pleasant and equally safe. She talks about the garden at her father's house, the roses that are beginning to open this week, the particular shade of pink that one of the older bushes produces, a colour she has never seen anywhere else. It is a nothing conversation. It is a conversation about flowers, and underneath it, two people are carefully, cautiously, silently deciding whether they would like to have another conversation like this one sometime soon. There are things you must never do while conversing with a gentleman. You must never speak in a low, confidential tone, because a whispered exchange between a young woman and a man will be noticed by everyone in the room and interpreted in the worst possible way. You must never lean in closer than the natural distance of polite conversation. You must never laugh too loudly at something he says, because loud laughter suggests an intimacy that has not been earned. You must never touch him, not even casually, not even a hand on the arm to emphasize a point. You must never hold his gaze for longer than the thought you're expressing requires, and you must never, under any circumstances, allow the conversation to drift into anything that resembles flirtation, because flirtation in a drawing room is the social equivalent of setting a small fire in a crowded building. It may seem harmless, but it can spread. I want to pause here and think about what it must have felt like to live inside these rules. Not to read about them, not to study them from the safe distance of 160 years, but to actually stand in a drawing room in June, with a man you might be falling in love with and know that every word you say, every gesture you make, every shift of your weight from one foot to the other is being silently evaluated by the people around you. To know that your mother is watching from across the room, not obviously, not with any visible concern, but watching all the same. To know that the other young women are watching too, measuring your composure against their own, noting whether you smile too much or not enough, whether you stand too close or too far, whether your conversation lasts 3 minutes or 5. 5 would be too long, 3 is acceptable, 4 is the edge of something. This is the landscape Penelope is navigating, and she is navigating it in real time, without a map, with nothing but the rules she has memorized and the instincts she was born with. And the hardest part is not the rules themselves. The hardest part is the gap between what the rules allow her to say and what she actually wants to say. The rules allow her to talk about roses. She wants to ask him whether he thinks about her when she is not in the room. The rules allow her to comment on the weather. She wants to know whether the glance he held at the ball meant what she thinks it meant. The rules allow her to listen politely and respond with mild interest. She wants to tell him that when he spoke about the light coming through the leaves, she could see it. She could actually see it, and that this has never happened to her before with anyone else's words. She says none of this. She talks about roses. He talks about light. The clock on the mantelpiece ticks steadily, and the jasmine comes in through the open doors, and the conversation moves at the exact pace that the rules require, which is the pace of breathing, which is the pace of something that is trying very hard not to become something else. There is another rule that applies specifically to young women, and it is perhaps the most difficult one of all. The books advise that a girl should speak with a gentleman in precisely the same way she speaks with a female companion, and should speak with her female companions as though gentlemen were always listening. In other words, there should be no difference. Her manner should be consistent, her tone steady, her topics appropriate, regardless of who's listening. She should never adopt a special voice or a special manner when speaking to a man, because to do so would be to acknowledge that the presence of man changes something inside her, and that acknowledgement, that admission of vulnerability, is the one thing the rules exist to prevent. There is a companion rule worth mentioning here, because it touches on something Penelope encounters this very evening. Young women are warned, very explicitly, against a particular kind of imitation. The books say that very young girls often watch their elders in conversation with gentlemen and conclude that there must be some particular manner to put on, some special way of tilting the head or modulating the voice, some secret performance that unlocks the door to male attention. And so they try to copy what they have seen, and in doing so they become affected and lose the one quality the books value above all others, which is simplicity, natural grace, the ability to be yourself without first constructing a version of yourself for the occasion. This is a strange instruction to find in a book that spends 300 pages telling you how to behave. It is the one place where the mask slips, And the author admits, almost reluctantly, that the best version of you is the one that has not been rehearsed. I think this is, in its way, the most impossible rule ever written. Because of course his presence changes something. Of course she speaks differently when he's near, not in the words she chooses, but in the care with which she chooses them. Of course her breathing changes, and the colour in her cheeks, and the steadiness of her hands. The books know this. They are not stupid. They know that a young woman's heart does not obey the same instructions as her tongue. But the books are not trying to change what she feels. They are trying to protect her from what others might see. And in a world where a single misread glance could alter the course of a life, that protection, however suffocating it might feel from the inside, was not trivial. The evening continues. There is tea. There are small cakes on a silver tray. Penelope speaks with other guests, an older woman who tells her about a garden tour in Surrey, a girl her own age named Eleanor Ashworth, who has recently become engaged and speaks about wedding preparations with a mixture of excitement and terror that Penelope finds both endearing and slightly alarming. Eleanor is the kind of friend who says too much, who confides too easily, who treats every conversation as an opportunity to share the contents of her heart without first checking whether the room is safe. Penelope loves her for this. She also recognises, with a clarity that surprises her, that she must not become her. She must not let her feelings spill out the way Eleanor's do, freely and warmly and dangerously. Frederick speaks with other people too. She sees him across the room talking to an older gentleman about something that makes them both nod seriously, and then to a young woman in green who laughs at something he says, and Penelope notices the laugh, and notices that it's too loud, and notices that she is noticing, and quietly tells herself to stop. Near the end of the evening, they find themselves standing near the same window. It is not planned, or if it is, neither of them would admit it. He asks whether she has been well since the ball. She says yes, thank you, she has been very well. He says the weather has been pleasant. She agrees. He says he hopes the summer will continue in this way. She hopes so too. There is a pause. In the pause, Jasmine comes through the window, and somewhere in the garden a bird sings a single note and then falls silent. And Frederick looks at Penelope, and she looks at him, and for one moment the rules dissolve entirely, and there are just two people standing near an open window in the warm dark. And something passes between them that has no name and no permission, and no precedent in any book ever written. Then he bows. She inclines her head. He walks away. The rules return like water closing over a stone. Henrietta appears at her elbow. It is time to go home. The evening has been very pleasant, her mother says, and Penelope agrees, and they collect their things and step into the carriage, and the horse begins to walk, and the sound of the hooves on the road is the only sound in the world, steady and slow and patient as a heartbeat. Penelope does not speak on the way home, neither does Henrietta. The jasmine fades. The road stretches out ahead, pale under the summer stars. There is an object in the Graves household that sits on a small table in the front hall, just inside the door, where the light from the fanlight window falls across it every morning. It is a silver tray. It is not large, perhaps the size of a woman's hand spread open, and it is polished every day by Sally, until the surface reflects the ceiling above it like a tiny warped mirror. On most mornings the tray is empty. But on some mornings, when Penelope comes downstairs, there is something on it. A card. A small rectangle of thick, cream-coloured paper, printed with a name and sometimes an address, and sometimes a few words written in ink along the bottom edge. This card, this small piece of paper no bigger than a playing card, is one of the most powerful instruments in Victorian social life. It is a calling card, and in 1860 it speaks a language more precise and more binding than anything that could be said aloud. If you have ever received a message that you had to read 3 times before you understood what it really meant, you know something about what it feels like to pick up a calling card from a silver tray, because the card itself says almost nothing. A name, an address, perhaps the words "At Home Wednesdays" printed in small type beneath the name, meaning that the person who left the card receives visitors on that particular day and is willing to receive you. But the real message is not in the words. It is in the act of leaving the card at all, in the timing of its arrival. and in what you do with it after you pick it up. The system works like this. When a family wishes to begin a social relationship with another family, the first step is not a letter, not a conversation, and certainly not an unannounced visit. The first step is a card. The wife of the family leaves her card at the home of the other wife. If the other wife wishes to accept the relationship, she returns the call within a few days, leaving her own card. This exchange of cards is a kind of handshake made of paper, a mutual agreement that these two families now recognise each other as belonging to the same social world. And until that exchange has taken place, the families do not exist to each other, at least not in any way that matters. I find this system both beautiful and slightly mad. There is something touching about a world that took its social contracts so seriously that even the act of saying hello required a formal exchange of documents. And there is something maddening about a world where you could live next door to someone for years and never speak to them, simply because the right card had never been left on the right tray on the right afternoon. But this is the world Penelope lives in. And within this world, the arrival of a certain card on a certain morning carries a weight that we can barely imagine. It is a Tuesday in the 3rd week of June. The ball was 3 weeks ago. Penelope comes downstairs at 9:30 to find that Henrietta is already into the parlour, seated by the window, reading a letter. On the silver tray in the hallway there is a card. It reads, in clean black type, Mrs. Arthur Carlyle. Below the name, in smaller type, it says, at home Thursdays, and below that an address in the neighbouring parish. Penelope picks up the card. She holds it in both hands. She reads it twice, though there is nothing on it that requires a second reading. Then she carries it into the parlour and places it on the table beside her mother's chair, and Henrietta glances at it and says nothing for a long moment, and then says, with the same calm she might use to comment on the weather, that she supposes they ought to return the call. This is the signal. This is the moment when the courtship moves from the realm of private feeling into the realm of public protocol. Frederick's mother has left her card at the Graves household. This means that the Carlyle family has noticed what happened at the ball and at the evening party, and that they are willing, at least in principle, to explore the possibility of a connection. It does not mean that Frederick has spoken to his mother about Penelope. It does not mean that a proposal is forthcoming. It does not even mean that the Carlyles approve of the match. It means only that the door has been opened a crack, and that the Graves family is invited to push it a little further. The return call must happen within the week. This is not optional. To delay a return call beyond a week is to decline the relationship, and to decline it with a rudeness that borders on insult. But the return call must also not happen too quickly. To rush over the next morning would suggest eagerness, and eagerness in the world of calling cards is as dangerous as indifference. Henrietta chooses Thursday. Thursday is Mrs. Carlyle's reception day. It is also 4 days away, which is the precise middle ground between too soon and too late. On Thursday morning, Penelope dresses with particular care, though the care must not be visible. A morning visit requires dress that is presentable but not showy. Something that says, I have taken the trouble to look well for you, but I have not taken so much trouble that you might think I am trying to impress you. She wears a grey silk with a modest collar, and a bonnet trimmed with a single ribbon, and her best gloves, which are dove-coloured and fit closely at the wrist. Henrietta wears dark blue. They leave the house at 12:15, because the proper hours for paying a morning call are between 12 and 3, and arriving in the first half hour signals a seriousness of intention without being presumptuous. There is an etiquette even to the act of leaving the house. You do not simply walk out the door. You check that your cards are in your case, 2 of Henrietta's and 1 of Penelope's, because a married woman leaves 2 cards when visiting another married woman, 1 for the lady of the house and 1 for her husband, even if the husband will never see it and would not care if he did. Penelope, as an unmarried daughter, accompanying her mother, leaves only her own. The cards must be crisp, unfolded, free of smudges. A damaged card with a bent edge or a tea stain, would be like arriving at someone's door with a hole in your glove. It is the kind of thing that would not be mentioned but would be noticed. And in this world, the things that are noticed but not mentioned are the ones that matter most. The Carlyle house is in the neighbouring parish. a 20-minute drive along a road that runs between hedgerows thick with hawthorn and elder. The house itself is larger than the Graves house, set back from the road behind a stone wall and a garden that is well kept but not ostentatious. A servant opens the door and takes their cards, and they are shown into the parlour to wait. The parlour is cool and quiet. There are books on the centre table, a watercolour of a coastal scene on the wall, a clock ticking on the mantelpiece. Penelope sits down and does not move. She does not stand up to look at the ornaments on the shelf because looking at another person's possessions while waiting for them to appear is considered ill-bred. She does not leaf through the cards in the card basket on the table, because reading someone else's cards is the social equivalent of reading their private letters. She simply sits, with her hands in her lap, and waits, and the waiting feels very long, though in truth it is only a few minutes. Mrs. Carlyle enters. She is a woman of perhaps 50, with grey hair worn under a lace cap, and a face that is handsome in the way that faces become when the person behind them has spent a lifetime being certain of their opinions. She rises to greet Henrietta first because Henrietta is the senior visitor, and then she turns to Penelope and offers her hand, and Penelope takes it briefly and curtsies and says how kind it is to be received. They sit, tea is brought, and the conversation begins. A morning call must last no fewer than 10 minutes and no more than 20. This rule is absolute. Fewer than 10 minutes suggests that you have come only out of obligation, that you are counting the seconds until you can leave. More than 20 suggests that you have nowhere better to be, that your social calendar is empty, that you are, in the worst interpretation, lonely. The correct visit occupies a space somewhere around 15 minutes, a quarter of an hour in which two women who do not know each other must find enough to say to fill the silence without revealing anything of substance. The hostess, meanwhile, has her own duties to perform. Mrs. Carlyle has been ready for callers since 11:30, dressed and seated in her parlour, with books and pictures arranged on the centre table, prepared to give her full attention to whoever arrives. If other visitors come while the Graves family is there, she must divide her attention equally, turning to each caller in succession, making sure that no one feels neglected. If a new visitor arrives and the room is already full, the earlier visitors are expected to begin taking their leave, not immediately, which would seem like flight, but after a polite interval so that the hostess is not overwhelmed. It is a carefully orchestrated rotation, and Mrs. Carlyle conducts it with the ease of a woman who has been doing this every Thursday for 30 years. Mrs. Carlyle asks about the journey. Henrietta says it was very pleasant. Mrs. Carlyle asks whether Penelope enjoyed the ball at Ravensgrange. Penelope says she did very much. Mrs. Carlyle says she is sorry she was not there herself, but that her son mentioned how agreeable the evening had been. This is the first time Frederick's name enters the conversation, and it enters in the most oblique way possible, as a piece of second-hand information about the quality of a party. Penelope's heart does something she does not show on her face. She says that yes, the music was particularly fine. I want to pause here and consider what is actually happening in this room. Two families are conducting an investigation. They are doing it with teacups and polite remarks about the weather, but it is an investigation nonetheless. Mrs. Carlyle is studying Penelope, watching how she holds her cup, how she speaks, whether she defers to her mother or speaks for herself, whether her manners are natural or rehearsed, whether she has the quality that the Victorians called breeding, which is not about wealth or lineage, but about the small, almost invisible signals that tell you whether a person belongs in your world. And Henrietta is studying Mrs. Carlyle right back, assessing the house, the furniture, the servant's livery, the quality of the tea, the way the older woman speaks about her family, looking for any sign of vulgarity or pretension or meanness that might make this connection undesirable. All of this is happening in silence, beneath a conversation about the roses in the garden. There is a moment, near the end of the visit, when Mrs. Carlyle turns to Penelope and says something that is, by the standards of this world, remarkably direct. She says that she hopes the Graves family will call again. This is not a casual remark. In the language of calling cards and morning visits, an invitation to return is an invitation to continue. It means the first test has been passed. It means the door, which was opened a crack by the card on the silver tray, has been pushed open a little further. Henrietta accepts the invitation with a warmth that is precisely calibrated, not too much, not too little, the conversational equivalent of a handshake that is firm without being aggressive. And then she rises, because the visit has lasted 14 minutes, which is close enough to 15 to be correct, and she thanks Mrs. Carlyle for her hospitality, and Penelope thanks her too, and they leave. In the carriage on the way home, Henrietta is quiet for the first few minutes. Then she says, in a voice that is thoughtful rather than decisive, that Mrs. Carlyle seems like a sensible woman. Penelope agrees. Henrietta says the house was well kept. Penelope agrees to this too. Henrietta says nothing else for the remainder of the drive, but there is a quality to her silence that Penelope recognises. It is the silence of a woman who is satisfied with what she has seen, but is not yet ready to say so. Over the following weeks, more cards appear on the silver tray. The Graves family leaves cards at the Carlyle house. The Carlyle family leaves cards in return. Henrietta begins to receive Mrs. Carlyle on her own reception days, and Mrs. Carlyle receives Henrietta on hers. The two women develop a cautious, measured friendship, the kind that is built not on affection but on mutual respect, which in this world is a far more reliable foundation. And through all of this, the cards themselves remain on the tray, each one a small record of intention. They accumulate over the weeks like leaves falling from a tree, each one insignificant on its own, but together forming a pattern that even the most casual observer could read. The Graves family and the Carlyle family are becoming acquainted. The card on the tray says so, the return card says so, the second visit confirms it, the third visit makes it a fact. There is a detail about calling cards that I have been wanting to mention, because it seems to me like one of those small, perfect inventions that only a culture obsessed with discretion could produce. When you leave a card at someone's home and you know they are not in, you may fold down one corner of the card. The fold indicates that you came in person, that you stood at the door and handed the card to the servant with your own hand, rather than sending it by messenger. It is a way of saying I was here. I made the effort. I crossed the town and stood on your doorstep and left this proof of my presence. The card itself is just paper, but the fold is a gesture, and gestures in this world mean everything. Penelope notices, on one of the cards left by Mrs. Carlyle, that the upper right corner has been folded down. She unfolds it carefully, presses it flat with her thumb, and puts the card in the basket on the hall table where all received cards are kept. She does not mention the fold to Henrietta. She does not need to. Henrietta has already seen it, and has already understood what it means, and has already begun to think about what comes next. What comes next is not another card. It is something that happens in a parlour on a Thursday afternoon, when Henrietta and Mrs. Carlyle are drinking tea and talking about the choir at the parish church, and Mrs. Carlyle says, as though the thought has just occurred to her, that Frederick has expressed an interest in walking the grounds of Ravensgrange, which are said to be very fine in midsummer, and perhaps the Graves family might like to join them for an afternoon walk there sometime next month. This is not an invitation to a walk. This is an invitation to be seen together in public, in daylight, in a setting where the walking itself will be secondary to the fact of the families walking side by side. It is the next step in the protocol, and it is a step that could not have been taken without the cards, without the visits, without the 40-minute conversations about roses and choirs and the quality of this year's strawberries. Henrietta says she thinks that would be very pleasant. Penelope, who is sitting beside her, and who has heard every word, says nothing at all. She does not need to. The cards have already spoken for her. The silver tray in the hallway catches the afternoon light, empty again, waiting for the next small rectangle of cream-coloured paper to arrive. July comes to Wenford in a slow wave of heat and light. The hedgerows thicken. The roses along the garden wall reach their peak and begin almost imperceptibly to turn. The days are long, the evenings warm, and the streets of the town fill with a particular kind of summer activity. Women walking in pairs under parasols, children playing near the churchyard wall, men standing in doorways with their hats pushed back, talking about the harvest. It is in this season that Penelope begins to understand something about her own visibility. In a drawing room, you're observed by a fixed audience, people who have been invited, people who know the rules, people who can be trusted to interpret what they see with a certain generosity. But in the street, you are observed by everyone. Every passerby will look at you, if only for a moment. Every detail of your dress, your posture, your walk, the speed at which you move, the company you keep, is available for inspection by strangers who owe you nothing, and who may draw whatever conclusions they please. The etiquette books are unusually blunt on this point. Nowhere, they argue, is a woman more thoroughly exposed to judgment than on a public pavement. Her dress, her carriage, the rhythm of her step, all of it lies open to the gaze of strangers who will form their opinion in the time it takes to pass her by. A drawing room forgives small errors, because drawing rooms are populated by people who share your world. The street does not forgive. The street belongs to everyone. Imagine walking through a town like Wenford on a summer morning. The pavement is warm under your boots. You're wearing a walking dress of quiet colour, because the first rule of street dress is that it must never be conspicuous. The material may be good. The fit may be precise. Your collar and sleeves should be fresh and white, your gloves clean and whole, your boots neat. But the overall effect must be modest. You may wear one piece of colour, a ribbon, a small brooch, but not more than one. You may not wear jewellery outdoors because ornaments belong to evening dress, to candlelight and closed rooms. Wearing them in daylight confuses two worlds that the Victorians kept carefully separate. A brooch at your collar is acceptable. A ring is tolerable. Anything more is a mistake that marks you as someone who does not understand the difference between a street and a ballroom. Your walk matters. It is not a thing you do while thinking of other things, it is a performance in itself. You must walk slowly, but not so slowly that you appear to be dawdling or waiting for someone. You must walk with your head upright, but not so high that you look haughty. You must set each foot down lightly but firmly, and you must not swing your arms. One hand holds your parasol, the other holds the edge of your skirt, raised just barely above the boot, just enough to keep the hem out of the mud but not an inch higher. To raise your skirt above the ankle is considered deeply improper. To drag it through the dirt is considered careless. The correct height is somewhere between the two, a margin so narrow that it requires constant attention to maintain. I think about the women who walked through streets like these every day, in shoes that were not designed for comfort, in skirts that weighed several pounds, holding their dresses at exactly the right height with one hand while managing a parasol and a reticule, and their own breathing with the other, and I feel a kind of exhausted admiration. These were not athletes. They were not trained for endurance. They were ordinary women doing an ordinary thing, and the ordinary thing required a degree of physical coordination and self-awareness that most of us would find extraordinary. Every step was a small act of discipline. Every block was a performance reviewed by the audience of the street. And yet there is something the books say about deportment that cuts deeper than any of these physical instructions. They say that the true foundation of graceful bearing is not training, it is consideration for others. The way you carry yourself should communicate without words that you are aware of the people around you, that you are not occupying more space than you need, that you are not drawing attention that belongs to someone else. A woman who walks well is not performing for an audience. She is making herself easy to be near. She is doing the small, invisible work of making sure that her presence in a shared space does not burden anyone who shares it with her. This is politeness understood not as a set of rules, but as a habit of the heart. And I think it may be the single most demanding thing the Victorians ever asked of their women, because it requires you to be simultaneously aware of your own body, your own clothing, your own expression, and the comfort of every person within 20 feet of you, all while walking at a pace that suggests you have never given any of it a moment's thought. The rules extend beyond walking. There are things a lady must never do outdoors, not because they are wrong, but because they are conspicuous. You must not gaze into shop windows, because it looks as though you are waiting for someone, or worse, that you have nothing better to do with your time. You must not look behind you, under any circumstances. To turn your head and look back is considered deeply ill-bred. though the books do not say why, and I suspect the reason is simply that a woman looking backward appears to be checking whether she is being followed, or hoping that she is, and both possibilities are equally unacceptable. You must not eat in the street. You must not adjust your clothing. You must not draw on your gloves or retie your bonnet strings in public view. Everything you wear should be arranged before you leave the house. And once you are outdoors, you should appear as though your appearance is permanent, effortless, and beyond further adjustment. There are rules about who you may acknowledge in public. If you are a lady and you see a gentleman you know, you are the one who must signal first. A bow, a nod, a small tilt of the head. The gentleman waits for the signal before he responds, because without it he cannot be certain whether the lady wishes to be recognised at this moment, in this place, in front of whoever happens to be nearby. It is the woman who opens the door. The man may only walk through it after she has done so. But here is the complication. You must never pause on the pavement to talk with a gentleman, not even briefly. If there is something you need to say, you may let him fall into step beside you, but your feet must keep moving. Standing still in open view, engaged in conversation with a man, creates an image that will travel through a town like Wenford faster than the mail coach. The substance of the exchange is irrelevant. What the observers see is a young woman who is willing to stand. There is another rule that strikes me as both practical and slightly absurd. You're not required to acknowledge acquaintances on the far side of the road. Even if you can see them perfectly well, even if they are waving or looking directly at you, the width of the street functions as a kind of invisible wall. Your social obligations extend only to your own pavement. Everything on the opposite side is, for the purposes of etiquette, another country entirely. It is against this backdrop that Penelope encounters Frederick Carlyle on a Wednesday morning in the second week of July. She is walking with Henrietta toward the linen draper's shop near the market square. He is coming from the opposite direction, alone, carrying a book under his arm. They see each other from perhaps 30 yards away, and for a few seconds there is the strange, suspended feeling of two people approaching each other on a narrow pavement, both aware that the next few moments will be governed by rules as precise as the steps of a dance. Penelope bows first. It is a small inclination of the head, accompanied by the faintest softening of her expression, not a smile, because smiling at a man in the street would be excessive, but something close to one, something that lives in the eyes rather than the mouth. Frederick returns the bow. He lifts his hat, holds it briefly at his side, and replaces it. This is the correct male response to a lady's greeting, neither more nor less, and it is executed with the same quiet precision that Penelope has come to associate with everything he does. He does not stop. She does not stop. They pass each other with perhaps 2 feet of space between them, and Penelope catches, for just a moment, the smell of wool and clean linen, and something else, something faint and warm that she cannot name. And then he is behind her, and she is walking on, and Henrietta has seen the entire exchange and says nothing. This is what a public encounter looks like in 1860. 2 people who are beginning to mean something to each other, passing on a pavement with the composure of diplomats, giving away nothing, receiving nothing, and yet both of them carrying the encounter home in their pockets like a warm stone they cannot put down. On Sundays, the rules of visibility shift to a different setting. The parish church at Wenford is a small stone building with a square tower and a graveyard where the older headstones lean at angles like tired sentries. The Graves family has a pew on the right side of the nave halfway back. The Carlyle family, Penelope has learned, sits 4 rows ahead and slightly to the left. Church has its own etiquette, separate from the street but equally detailed. You enter slowly, reverently. You do not bow to friends you pass in the aisle, because inside the church you are understood to be absorbed in thoughts appropriate to the occasion. You take your seat quietly, you do not look around, you do not whisper to your companion. You kneel, stand, and sit according to the customs of the service, and you give your attention to the minister, or appear to give it, which in practice amounts to the same thing. There is an etiquette even to sitting in a pew. You do not enter a pew that is not your own without being shown to it by the sexton, because the pew belongs to a family who may wish to fill it with their own guests. If a stranger is seated beside you and seems unfamiliar with the order of service, you hand them a hymn book or offer to share your own with a silent bow. If a gentleman offers you his seat in a crowded church, you accept with a quiet nod and a whispered thank you. You do not begin putting on your coat or shutting your hymn book before the final benediction, because to prepare for departure while the service is still in progress is an insult to both the clergyman and to God. And when the service ends, you do not hurry. You rise, you collect yourself, you walk out slowly, as though the peace of the hour is something you are reluctant to leave behind. These seem like small things. They are small things, but taken together, they create a particular atmosphere. A weekly ritual of stillness and restraint that turns an hour on a Sunday morning into something that feels almost like meditation. Everyone in this church is performing the same careful discipline, sitting straight, singing without excess, keeping their eyes where they belong, and the cumulative effect is a room full of people who are, for 1 hour, entirely contained. Nothing spills over, nothing leaks out. And for Penelope, who has spent the past several weeks trying to contain something that keeps threatening to spill, the church is both a relief and a torment, because here at least the containment is shared. Penelope gives her attention to the minister. She holds her hymn book open at the correct page, and sings in a voice that is clear but not loud. She listens to the sermon with her eyes forward and her hands folded in her lap. She does all of this correctly as she has been taught, and she is aware in a way that she cannot entirely suppress that Frederick is sitting 4 rows ahead and slightly to the left, and that the back of his head is visible between the shoulders of the people in front of him, and that once, during the second reading, he turned his head very slightly, not enough to look at her, but enough for her to see the line of his jaw in the thin light from the stained glass window. She does not acknowledge this. She looks at her hymn book. The congregation rises for the final hymn, and the organ fills the church with a sound that vibrates through the wooden pew and up through the soles of her boots, and Penelope sings, and does not look at the back of Frederick's head, and does not think about the fact that this is the closest they have been to each other since the evening party, separated by 4 rows of oak and a silence that neither of them is allowed to break. After the service, the congregation gathers briefly in the churchyard. This is one of the few settings where the rules relax, just slightly. You may speak to acquaintances here. You may exchange pleasantries. You may even, if the families have been introduced, stand in a small group and talk for a few minutes about the sermon, the weather, the condition of the road. It is understood that the churchyard after Sunday service is a liminal space. Not quite the street and not quite the drawing room. A place where the usual boundaries are softened by the shared experience of having just sat through something together. Frederick approaches. He greets Henrietta first, as the rules require, and then Penelope, and they stand in the churchyard under the shade of a yew tree and talk about the sermon, which was about patience, and which Penelope cannot remember a single word of. Mrs. Carlyle joins them. The 2 mothers speak. The 2 young people stand a little apart, not by design, but by the natural drift of a small group rearranging itself, and Frederick says something about the yew tree, how old it must be, how many services it must have stood through, and Penelope says she has never thought about it before, but now she will think about it every time she comes here. And for a moment they are both looking up at the branches, and neither of them is looking at the other, and the silence between them is the kindest thing either of them has said all week. I think about how much of this courtship is happening in the margins, not in ballrooms or drawing rooms or parlours, but in the spaces between them, on pavements and in churchyards, and in the 2-foot gap between 2 people walking in opposite directions on a Wednesday morning. The rules govern the formal settings, but the feelings live in the informal ones, in the glance across 4 rows of pews, in the smell of wool as someone passes, in a sentence about a tree that means something entirely different from what it says. This is the quietest part of the story. Nothing is happening. Everything is happening. 2 people are falling in love in a world that will not let them say so, and the world they live in, with its pavements and parasols and Sunday sermons and stone walls warm in the July sun, is doing its best to hold them apart and bring them together at the same time. The yew tree drops a shadow across the churchyard path. The bells have stopped ringing. Somewhere beyond the wall, a cart moves slowly down the road, its wheels turning with the same steady patience as everything else in this story. The sun is warm on the stone. The summer is at its height, and the days stretch out ahead like a long, bright corridor, and somewhere at the end of it there is a door that neither of them has opened yet. There is a question that hangs over every young woman in Wenford, and in every town like Wenford, and in every drawing room and every parish church and every quiet bedroom where a girl sits with her needlework and her thoughts. The question is not asked aloud. It does not need to be. It is in the air, the way the smell of bread is in the air near a bakery, constant, pervasive, so familiar that you almost stop noticing it is there. The question is this: when will she marry? Not whether. When. Because in 1860, the question of whether a young woman will marry is not really a question at all. Marriage is the expected outcome of a woman's life, the way harvest is the expected outcome of a planted field. Everything she has been taught, everything she has been trained to do, from the way she holds her fork to the way she enters a room, to the way she folds a calling card, has been preparation for this. And the preparation has a deadline. It is not written down, but everyone knows it. At 17, you're expected to begin receiving proposals. By 20, you should have accepted one. By 25, if you're still unmarried, the silence around you changes from the hopeful silence of a garden waiting for rain to the uncomfortable silence of a room where something has gone wrong. Penelope is 20. She's not late. But she is aware, with a clarity that surprises her, that the clock has started. The books of this period are startlingly frank about the pressure. They describe a pattern that begins with hope and ends with resignation. A young woman enters society at 17, full of expectation. If proposals come quickly, the matter is settled, and she moves on to the next phase of her life with the brisk efficiency of someone catching a train they were always meant to catch. But if the proposals do not come, or if they come from the wrong people, something shifts. The first few years of waiting are cushioned by the assumption that time is still on her side. But after 23, 24, the cushion wears thin. Friends who are presented in the same season begin to marry one by one. The invitations to balls and evening parties continue to arrive, but they carry a different weight now because each gathering is also a marketplace, and she is still on the shelf and everyone can see it, and nobody says a word. The books describe the following 10 years with an honesty that borders on brutal. A subdued vexation settles in. The sweetness of the original character begins to wear away, not from any single disappointment, but from the slow, corrosive effect of expectations unfulfilled. She watches younger women arrive at the same ballroom she's been attending for years, and she sees them do exactly what she did at their age, with the same fresh confidence, the same untested hope. And she knows something they do not know yet, which is that confidence and hope are not enough. Something else is required, something she cannot name and cannot manufacture, and the not knowing what it is, the inability to identify the missing piece, is perhaps the cruelest part of the whole arrangement. And yet the books do not entirely despair. They say, with a careful optimism that reads like a hand reaching across a century, that the panic subsides, that around 27 or 28, the views of life grow calmer, that the mind, having had time to observe and reflect, becomes sharper, more discerning, more capable of genuine judgment, and that marriages made at this stage, if they are made from principle and not from desperation, are often the happiest of all, because they are built on knowledge rather than fantasy. I find myself reading these passages with a kind of helpless anger, not at the women who were navigating the only world they had, but at the architecture of that world, which measured a woman's value in proposals the way a merchant measures cloth in yards. And yet, underneath the anger, I feel something else, something closer to recognition, because the truth is that we have not entirely left this behind. The vocabulary has changed, the timelines have shifted, but the feeling of being measured, of being assessed against a standard you did not choose and cannot quite meet, of watching other people arrive at a destination you have not yet reached. This feeling is not historical. It is alive. It breathes in the chest of anyone who has ever lain awake at night wondering whether something is wrong with them, because the thing that was supposed to happen has not happened yet. The book says something about this that I want to hold carefully, because I think it contains both wisdom and cruelty in equal measure. They say that about 27 or 28, something changes. The frantic competitive energy of the early 20s subsides. The woman's views of life sober. Her expectations become more realistic. Her mind, having had time to observe the world, has improved. And often, it is at this stage that she marries well, because she is no longer choosing out of panic or vanity, but out of genuine judgment. The books present this as a kind of consolation, a reassurance that patience will be rewarded. But there is something chilling about the arithmetic beneath it. A decade of quiet humiliation, followed by a marriage born not of passion, but of hard-won clarity. The books call this wisdom. I'm not sure that's the only word for it. Penelope is not yet in this territory. She is 20, she has a suitor who seems genuine, and the machinery of courtship is moving at the speed it is supposed to move. But she is aware of the territory. She can see it from where she stands, the way you can see a distant country from the top of a hill, and the knowledge of it, the awareness that she could end up there if things do not proceed as they should, gives everything she does a faint undertone of urgency that the rules require her to suppress. There is a conversation that happens in the parlour one evening in late July. Henrietta and Penelope are alone. William is in his study. Sally has gone to bed. The house is quiet in the way that houses are quiet when the day has used up all its noise, and what remains is just the tick of the clock and the creak of a floorboard settling. Henrietta puts down her sewing and says without preamble that she thinks it might be time to consider whether Frederick Carlyle is a man of good character. This is the mother's role, not to choose for her daughter, but to guide the evaluation. The books are clear on this. A young woman's heart must ultimately decide for itself, because no one else can know its secret movements, but her heart does not have the experience to judge character, and this is where a mother's observation becomes essential. The mother sees what the daughter cannot see or will not see, because her vision is clouded by the very feelings she is trying to understand. The books go further. They say that a mother's sympathy is the one resource that never runs dry, the one confidant who will not weaken your resolve or flatter your vanity, or push you toward a decision that serves her interests rather than yours. But they also say, with a gentleness that reads like an apology, that even a mother's patience should not be tested beyond endurance. Do not pour out your sorrows endlessly. Do not make her the victim of your feelings. Be generous with the one person who will never stop being generous with you. Henrietta does not speak about feelings. She speaks about facts. She asks whether Penelope has noticed how Frederick treats the servants when they are in company, whether he is patient with people who bore him, whether he speaks well of his family when they are not present, whether his manners are consistent, the same in a drawing room and a churchyard and on the street, or whether they change depending on who is watching. These are the questions the books recommend, and they are, in their way, remarkably sophisticated questions, because they are not about what a man says when he's trying to impress you. They are about what he does when he is not. Penelope answers carefully. She has noticed that Frederick is patient. She has noticed that he speaks of his mother with respect and of his elder brother without resentment. She has noticed that his manner does not change between one setting and another, that the quiet steadiness she saw at the ball is the same quiet steadiness she sees in the churchyard and on the street. She has noticed, too, that he does not try to be interesting. He simply is, in the way that a well-made chair is interesting, not because it draws attention to itself, but because it does its work so well that you do not think about it until you sit down and realize how comfortable you are. She does not say this last part. She says that he seems like a steady person, and Henrietta nods, and that is enough for now. The books warn against one particular failing in a suitor, and they warn against it with a vehemence that suggests they have seen its consequences many times. The failing is selfishness. Not the obvious kind, not the man who takes the last piece of bread or refuses to share his umbrella, but the deep, quiet, structural selfishness that reveals itself only in small things over time. the man who always chooses his own comfort over the comfort of others, the man who is cold to his servants, dismissive to his sisters, on difficult terms with his brothers, the man whose generosity is a performance rather than a habit. This kind of selfishness, the books say, is the one defect that a marriage cannot survive because it infects every detail of daily life, from the smallest domestic arrangement to the largest decision, and it cannot be reformed by love, no matter how deep or how patient that love may be. A hasty temper can be forgiven, a limited income can be endured, even a man who drinks too much can sometimes be helped. But a man who is fundamentally selfish, who places himself at the centre of every room he enters and expects the world to arrange itself around him, this man will wear away his wife's hope the way water wears away stone, slowly, invisibly, until one day she reaches for it and finds that it is gone. The books also warn with equal force against the danger of rushing into an engagement. It strikes them as astonishing that the welfare of an entire life should be determined after knowing someone for only a handful of weeks. A man's principles may be known from the testimony of others. His manners may be pleasant. His means and expectations may be clearly understood, but his temper, that word of unspeakable weight, and his daily habits, and his capacity for constancy, these cannot be known without long and careful observation. Very little is needed to ruin the happiness of a marriage if that little proceeds from a rooted defect of character. And the defect will not show itself at a ball. It will not show itself over a cup of tea on a Thursday afternoon. It will show itself in the 100th hour of ordinary life when the candles are low and the guests have gone home, and there is nothing left but two people and the truth of who they are. I think this is one of the most useful pieces of advice in the entire book, and it is advice that has nothing to do with 1860. Study the man in his own home before you give him yours. Watch how he treats the people who cannot do anything for him. Notice whether his kindness has an audience or whether it continues in private when no one is looking, when there is nothing to gain. This is not romantic advice, it is survival advice. And the fact that it was being given to young women 160 years ago, in a world where they had almost no power to leave a bad marriage once they were in it, makes it not quaint but urgent. Penelope thinks about this. She thinks about it while stitching her ivy leaf cushion cover, which is nearly finished now, the green and cream thread forming a pattern that has become, without her intending it, a kind of calendar of this summer. Each stitch corresponding to a day, each row corresponding to a week, the whole thing growing steadily under her fingers the way the courtship is growing steadily around her. Eleanor comes to visit on a Thursday afternoon. She's engaged now, officially, to a man named Arthur Whitfield, whom Penelope has met twice and found pleasant but unremarkable. Eleanor speaks about the engagement with a breathless, slightly frantic energy that Penelope recognises as happiness mixed with terror. She talks about the wedding dress, the guest list, the house they will live in after the ceremony. She talks about the trousseau she is assembling, 2 years' worth of undergarments and 1 year's worth of dresses, all of which must be ordered and fitted and packed before the wedding date. She talks about learning to keep household accounts, because a wife who cannot manage a budget is, in Eleanor's words, a ship without a rudder, and Penelope suspects this particular phrase was borrowed from Eleanor's mother. There is something both touching and instructive in watching Eleanor prepare for marriage. She is doing the practical work that the books recommend, the work of turning herself from a girl who is taken care of into a woman who takes care of others. She is learning the cost of candles and coal, the management of a cook, the mysterious arithmetic of making a limited income stretch across 12 months of meals and heating and clothing and repairs. These are not romantic preparations. They are the quiet, unglamorous foundation on which the entire institution of marriage rests. And the books are emphatic that a woman who skips this stage, who enters marriage expecting the same comforts she enjoyed in her father's house without understanding what those comforts cost, is setting herself up for a disappointment that no amount of love can prevent. Eleanor asks Penelope with a directness that would make Henrietta wince whether there is any news about Frederick. Penelope says there is no news. This is true, there is no news. There is only the steady accumulation of small moments, cards on trays and conversations about trees and glances across churchyards, none of which adds up to news, all of which adds up to something she does not yet have permission to name. Eleanor squeezes her hand and says she is sure it will happen soon. Penelope thanks her and changes the subject because the books have taught her and experience has confirmed that talking about what you hope for is the surest way to damage it. Words make things real before they are ready to be real, and she is not ready. Not yet. The evening comes on slowly. The light turns golden, then amber, then a deep, bruised violet that settles over the rooftops like a cloth laid gently over a sleeping child. Penelope sits by the window and watches the last of the light fade from the garden, and she holds the question in her chest the way she has held it all summer, not pushing it away, not pulling it closer, just letting it sit where it is, heavy and warm and patient, like a stone that has been in the sun all day. Will he ask? Will she say yes? Will the life that follows be a good one? She does not know. The books say she cannot know, not yet, not with certainty. But they also say that if she has done her work carefully, if she has studied the man with her judgment as well as her heart, if she has listened to her mother and trusted her own instincts and refused to be rushed by the clock that everyone can hear ticking, then the answer, when it comes, will be one she can live with. The garden darkens, the first stars appear. The house settles into its nighttime quiet, and Penelope closes her eyes, and the question is still there, unanswered, unresolved, but no longer quite as frightening as it was this morning. It happens on a Tuesday afternoon in August in the garden behind the Graves house, while Henrietta is inside writing letters, and Sally is in the kitchen and William is at his study window looking out at nothing in particular. It happens in the simplest possible way. Frederick's Carlyle is standing beside a rosebush that has gone slightly past its peak, the petals beginning to brown at the edges, and Penelope is standing beside him, and he asks her. He does not kneel. The etiquette books do not mention kneeling, and in practice, a Victorian proposal is not the theatrical event that later generations will make of it. It is a conversation, a quiet, careful, deliberate conversation between two people who have been moving toward this moment for 3 months, through dances and drawing rooms and calling cards and churchyards, and who have arrived at it the way you arrive at the end of a long walk, not with a dramatic final step, but with the gradual realization that you are already where you are going. What he says is private. The books do not record the exact words of proposals because proposals, unlike balls and morning visits and street encounters, belong to the two people who are in them and to no one else. But whatever he says it quietly, and Penelope, who has been preparing for this moment without knowing she was preparing, who has been analysing her own heart for weeks with the rigour the books demand, gives him her answer, in a voice that is steady and sure, and so soft that a person standing 10 feet away would not hear it. She says yes. And then something extraordinary happens. Nothing changes. The garden is the same. The rosebush is the same. The sky overhead is the same milky August blue it was 5 minutes ago. Penelope is standing in the same spot, in the same dress, with the same hands that were holding the same fan before he spoke. And yet everything has changed, in the way that everything changes when a door you have been looking at for a long time finally opens, and you step through it and discover that the room on the other side is not at all what you imagined. Not because it is worse or better, but because it is real, and the imagined version, no matter how carefully constructed, was always missing this one essential quality. I think about the quietness of this moment. In our world, a proposal is often a spectacle, a public event with witnesses and cameras and orchestrated surprises. In Penelope's world, it is the opposite. It is the most private thing that has happened to her since the courtship began. For the first time in 3 months, there is no audience, no mother watching from across the room, no drawing room full of polite observers, no street full of strangers. There is only a garden and a rosebush and 2 people and a question and an answer, and the answer is the first completely honest thing Penelope has been allowed to say since the night of the ball. After she says yes, there is a protocol. Frederick must speak to William. This is not optional. A gentleman does not consider himself engaged until he has received the father's permission, and a young woman does not consider herself engaged until the gentleman has asked for it and received it. Frederick goes inside. Penelope stays in the garden. She stands there alone for perhaps 10 minutes, which is the longest 10 minutes of her life so far, and she looks at the browning roses and the stone wall and the patch of blue sky above the chimney pots, and she waits. Frederick comes back. He is smiling very slightly, the way a man smiles when he has just passed through a conversation that required courage and has come out the other side with what he wanted. William has given his consent. The engagement is official, and yet even now there is a protocol for what happens next. The engagement must not be announced publicly until both families have been informed privately. Frederick's mother must be told, Penelope's closest relatives must be told. The clergyman at the parish church must be told, because the banns will need to be read on 3 successive Sundays before the wedding can take place. Only after all of these private notifications have been completed, only after the inner circle has been given time to absorb the news and offer their blessings or their reservations, does the engagement enter the wider world. And even then, it enters quietly, through the medium of calling cards and morning visits, not through any kind of public announcement. There is no notice in the newspaper, there is no party, there is simply a gradual widening of the circle of people who know, spreading something outward like ripples in a pond, until eventually everyone in Wenford is aware that Miss Penelope Graves is to marry Mr. Frederick Carlyle, and everyone behaves as though they are pleased, whether they are or not. Now the rules change. This is the part that surprises Penelope, because she has spent 3 months learning one set of rules, and now, overnight, a different set applies. The boundary between what she is allowed to do and what she is not has shifted, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to feel the difference. She is allowed to speak to Frederick alone, not for long periods, and not behind closed doors, but in a garden, in a parlour with the door open, in a corner of a drawing room where they can be seen but not overheard. This is a freedom that would have been unthinkable a week ago. A week ago, every conversation between them was conducted under the eyes of at least one other person, with every word calibrated for public consumption. Now they're permitted a narrow margin of privacy, just enough to begin the slow, careful work of learning who the other person actually is when the performance stops. They're also allowed to write to each other. Letters during an engagement are expected, and the rules governing them are remarkably specific. A letter to a fiancé should be written in a clear hand on good paper, with the date and address properly placed. It should be warm but not excessive, affectionate but not sentimental. It should contain news of the day, observations about the people and events around the writer, and the occasional expression of feeling delivered with restraint. A letter that is too passionate risks being misunderstood if it is ever seen by someone other than its intended reader. A letter that is too cold risks giving the impression that the engagement is one of convenience rather than affection. The correct tone, as in all things, is somewhere in the middle, close enough to the truth to feel honest, far enough from it to remain safe. The books on letter writing are emphatic about one point above all others. A good letter is not a performance of learning or wit. It is a conversation conducted on paper. It should read the way the writer speaks, naturally and without affectation. It should contain the small, ordinary details of daily life, the things that seem too trivial to mention, and that are, in fact, the only things the reader wants to hear. What did you have for breakfast? What does the garden look like this morning? What did your mother say about the curtains? These domestic particulars, the books argue, are the true content of a letter, because they are the substance of the life the two people will soon be sharing, and every scrap of information about that life, however ordinary, is a small brick in the foundation of their future together. I find it moving that the first truly private communication between Penelope and Frederick takes the form of written words on paper, carried by a servant from one house to another, folded and sealed and handed over with the same formality as a calling card. There is something about a letter that a conversation does not have. A letter can be held. It can be read again. It can be kept in a drawer and taken out on a difficult evening and held close and read by candlelight until the words become a kind of company. Penelope has never had this before, this object that carries the voice of someone she cares about into the quiet of her own room. And the first time she receives a letter from Frederick, she sits by the window and reads it twice before she folds it and puts it away. And her hands are shaking very slightly, not from nervousness, but from the strangeness of being known. The engagement also triggers a new set of practical obligations. Penelope must begin assembling her trousseau. This is not a shopping trip, it is a campaign. The books recommend that a bride stock her wardrobe to last a full 2 years in undergarments and a complete year in dresses, and that she acquire a travelling outfit in some plain practical colour with a close bonnet and veil, and that she avoid any display of her status as a bride while travelling, because conspicuousness in a new wife is considered deeply vulgar. 2 years' worth of undergarments. Think about this for a moment. 2 years of chemises, petticoats, stockings, nightgowns, corset covers, drawers, all of which must be cut and sewn and fitted and hemmed, most of them by hand, many of them trimmed with lace or embroidery that takes hours to complete. A year's worth of dresses, each one requiring multiple fittings, each one designed for a specific purpose. Morning dress, afternoon dress, evening dress, walking dress, visiting dress, a cloak for the coming season, bonnets, gloves, handkerchiefs by the dozen, each one hemmed and initialed. The sheer volume of fabric that must pass through a seamstress's hands before a Victorian woman is considered ready for marriage is staggering, and the preparation can take months, which is why engagements of this period are rarely shorter than 3 months, and often stretch to 6 or more. And there is the wedding dress itself to consider. It must be white, entirely white, a plain white silk for a morning ceremony, with a white mantle and a white bonnet trimmed with orange blossoms, and a plain veil. The orange blossoms are not optional. They are the universal emblem of a bride, the one piece of decoration that belongs exclusively to her and to no one else in the wedding party. The bridesmaids may wear white, but they may not wear veils, and they may not wear orange flowers. These belong to the bride alone, and their presence in her hair or on her bonnet is the visible mark that separates her from every other woman in white who will stand beside her at the altar. Penelope and Henrietta spend the weeks after the engagement in a state of organised industry. The sewing room in the Graves house, a small room at the back of the upper floor that is usually quiet, becomes the centre of operations. Bolts of white cotton and fine linen are delivered. A seamstress from Wenford comes 3 times a week to cut and pin and stitch. Sally joins the effort, her quick, practical fingers hemming handkerchiefs and sewing buttons with a speed that the seamstress quietly admires. The ivy leaf cushion cover, which Penelope was so close to finishing, lies abandoned on its frame in the parlour, overtaken by the more urgent needlework of her future life. There is something about this labour that I find unexpectedly comforting. In a story that has been until now about waiting and watching and suppressing, the trousseau is the first thing that is purely practical. It is not about feelings, it is not about performance. It is about cloth and thread and the simple, repetitive work of making things that will be used and worn and washed and mended for years to come. There is a kind of peace in this work, the peace of hands that know what they are doing, the peace of a task that has a clear beginning and a clear end, and Penelope falls into it with a relief that surprises her. After months of navigating the invisible, she is finally making something she can hold. The engagement also changes her position in the social landscape of Wenford. She is no longer a young woman waiting to be chosen. She has been chosen. The calling cards that arrive now carry a different tone. The conversations at evening parties shift. Women who were once competitors become allies, offering advice about household management and the keeping of accounts, and the particular challenges of living with a man who leaves his boots in the wrong place every single evening. There is a warmth in these conversations that was not there before, a sisterhood of shared experience, and Penelope receives it gratefully, even as she recognises that it was always conditional. They are kind to her now because she has succeeded. They would have been kind in a different way if she had not. Frederick visits the Graves house twice a week. He sits in the parlour with Penelope and Henrietta, and sometimes with William, who has developed a quiet respect for the younger man, and they talk about the house that Frederick is arranging for them to live in after the wedding, a modest but well-built place on the edge of the neighbouring parish, with a garden that faces south and a kitchen large enough for a cook and a scullery maid. They talk about the furniture they will need, the curtains, the crockery. They talk about these things with the same careful, unhurried attention they once gave to conversations about the weather and the light coming through leaves, and the conversations are still, in their way, about the same thing. They're about building a world together, one small decision at a time. In the evenings, after Frederick has gone, Penelope sits in the parlour with Henrietta and sews, and the clock ticks, and the garden outside the window darkens by one more minute each night as the summer begins its long, slow turn toward autumn. The wedding date is set for October. The invitations must be prepared. The cards of the bridegroom and the cards of the bride are tied together with a white ribbon and folded inside a sheet of notepaper bearing the name of the bride's mother, the date of the reception, and the hours during which guests will be received. These are enclosed in white envelopes and tied with white satin ribbon. If wedding cake is to be sent, it is placed in a white box, the invitation fastened to the outside of the lid with another ribbon. White upon white upon white, the whole material culture of a Victorian wedding is an exercise in whiteness, in blankness, in the appearance of beginning as though the bride is a page that has never been written on, and the wedding is the first word. The trousseau grows. The letters continue to arrive, folded and sealed, carried by a servant, read by candlelight. And Penelope, who has spent 3 months learning how to feel something without showing it, is now learning something perhaps even more difficult. She is learning how to show it, how to let Frederick see the inside of her mind without the buffer of etiquette, without the safety of a drawing room full of observers, without the comfortable distance that the rules once provided. She is learning to be known, and being known, it turns out, is not the relief she expected. It is its own kind of exposure, gentler than the exposure of the ballroom, but deeper, because this time there is no performance to hide behind. She does it anyway. She writes her letters, she sits in the parlour and talks about curtains. She lets him see her laugh, really laugh. Not the controlled, pleasant expression she wore at the ball, but the real thing, sudden and warm and slightly too loud, and he looks at her when she laughs like that, and what she sees in his face is not surprise. It is recognition. The autumn advances, the leaves turn, the trousseau grows drawer by drawer, shelf by shelf. Each folded garment a promise laid down in cotton and silk. And somewhere in the neighbouring parish, in a house that Penelope has not yet seen but that will soon be hers, the rooms are being aired, the curtains hung, the fireplaces swept clean and laid with fresh kindling, waiting for the first match, waiting for the first warmth, waiting to become a home. She wakes before the light does, that's the first thing. The room is still dark and the house is still quiet and Sally hasn't come in yet. And for a few seconds Penelope lies there and doesn't know what day it is, just a girl in a bed, in the dark, with the blanket pulled up to her chin and the faint smell of cold ash from last night's fire. And then she remembers. It's October. It's a Thursday. And by noon today she won't be Penelope Graves anymore. She doesn't move right away. She lies there and listens to the house, the creak of a floorboard downstairs. That's Henrietta, who's been up since before 5 because there are things to arrange that couldn't be arranged last night and can't wait until after breakfast. The distant clatter of something in the kitchen, that's the cook already working because there will be guests to feed after the ceremony. And somewhere outside, beyond the window, a bird she can't see is singing a single note, over and over, as though it's practicing something it hasn't quite learned. You know what I keep thinking about? The ordinariness of this morning. In a few hours, Penelope's entire life will change. She'll walk into a church as one person and walk out as another. She'll take a new name, she'll leave her parents' house for the last time as their daughter, and enter a different house as someone's wife. And yet this morning, this particular morning, begins exactly the way every other morning of her life has begun, with the dark, with the quiet, with the slow, reluctant act of opening your eyes and realizing that the day has come whether you're ready for it or not. Sally arrives with warm water and a candle. She sets the basin on the washstand and pulls the curtains open, and the sky outside is just beginning to turn. Not light yet, not really, but not quite dark either. That strange grey hour that doesn't belong to the night or to the morning, but to the space between them. Sally doesn't say much. She doesn't need to. She's laid everything out the night before, each piece in its place and each layer in the order it'll be put on, and now she moves through the room with the quiet efficiency of someone who's done this 100 times, even though she hasn't, not like this, not for a wedding. The dressing takes a long time, longer than any other morning Penelope can remember. There's the chemise first, fine white cotton, then the corset, then the petticoats. 2 of them today, both white, both new, both part of the trousseau that's been growing in the upstairs sewing room for the past 2 months. Sally laces the corset with steady hands and pulls it snug but not too tight, because a bride who faints at the altar isn't romantic. She's a problem. And then the dress. It's white silk. Plain, not ornate. The kind of plainness that costs more than decoration, because there's nowhere for the fabric to hide. Every seam shows. Every fold matters. Sally lifts it over Penelope's head and settles it onto her shoulders. And the weight of it is surprising, heavier than her everyday dresses. Heavier than the muslin she wore to the ball 5 months ago. And for a moment Penelope stands very still and feels the silk fall into place around her body and thinks, "This is the most expensive thing I've ever worn, and I'll only wear it once." The buttons run down the back, 24 of them, each one covered in the same white silk, and Sally fastens them one by one, starting at the neck and working down, and each tiny click of button-through loop is like a word in a sentence that's being written on Penelope's body. And by the time Sally reaches the last one, the sentence is complete, and Penelope can't undo it by herself. She literally cannot take this dress off without help. There's something in that, something I can't quite articulate, about a garment you can't remove alone. It's beautiful, and it's a kind of binding. The bonnet comes next, white, trimmed with the orange blossoms. Sally pins it into Penelope's hair, which she's arranged in a low, careful style that took 20 minutes and looks like it took none. The orange blossoms are waxy and fragrant and slightly unreal looking, the way all flowers look when they've been detached from their stem and pinned into someone's hair. They're the one thing in this outfit that belongs only to the bride. The bridesmaids can wear white, they can wear bonnets, but they can't wear orange flowers, and they can't wear veils. Those are hers alone. The markers that say, out of all the women in white who'll stand in that church today, this is the one whose life is about to change. The veil is plain. It falls from the bonnet to just below her shoulders, and through it the world looks slightly softer, slightly further away, as though someone's drawn a thin curtain between Penelope and everything she's known. She looks at herself in the mirror. Sally stands behind her, one hand still resting on the veil, and for a long moment neither of them speaks. There's a girl in that mirror who looks like Penelope, but also doesn't. The way you look like yourself in a photograph, but also don't, because the photograph catches something you can't see when you're just living inside your own face. The candle on the dresser flickers. The bird outside is still singing. Downstairs, the house is in motion. Henrietta is dressed and ready, wearing a silk that isn't white, because today the white belongs to someone else. William is in his study, wearing his best coat, sitting in his chair, looking at his hands. He'll give Penelope away in a few hours. That's the form of phrase they use. Give her away. As though she's something he's been holding for 20 years and is now handing to someone else, carefully, with both hands, the way you'd hand someone a lamp you didn't want to see go out. I don't know what William is thinking. The books don't say. The books are written for women, about women, and the fathers in these stories are mostly Tion. Mostly peripheral, mostly standing in doorways with their best coats on, waiting to do the one thing the ceremony requires of them, and then stepping back into the background where they've always been. But he's here. He's in his study. And I'd like to think he's sitting there remembering the day Penelope was born, or the first time she walked, or the first time she said a word that made him laugh, and that he's holding all of those memories in his chest the way you hold a breath you're not ready to let go of. The white silk gloves are laid on the hall table. Penelope pulls them on, one finger at a time, smoothing the leather. No, not leather, kid. Soft as paper, white as the dress. She buttons them at the wrist. There's a small detail here that matters. The left glove has been prepared. The button at the wrist is slightly loosened, so that later at the altar, when the moment comes, the first bridesmaid can remove it quickly and cleanly without fumbling, because the ring has to go on the bare finger. You can't put a wedding ring on over a glove, and you can't stand at the altar wrestling with a button while the clergyman waits and the congregation watches. So the glove is prepared in advance, quietly, practically, the way everything in this world is prepared, with invisible effort, so that the visible moment looks effortless. The carriages arrive. There's a strict order to this, and it isn't negotiable. The bridesmaids go first. Two girls in white dresses with coloured ribbons and flowers in their hair. No veils, no orange blossoms. They climb into the first carriage and it pulls away, and then the relatives, and then last of all Penelope and her parents. Last. The bride is always last. She arrives at the church after everyone else is already seated, already waiting, already watching the door. Her entrance is the final entrance. It's the one the whole morning has been building toward, and it has to be last because that's how stories work, isn't it? The most important thing comes at the end. You don't put the answer before the question. You don't light the candle before the room is dark. The carriage ride to the church takes 12 minutes. Penelope sits between Henrietta and William. Nobody talks. The only sound is the horses' hooves on the road, and though the creak of the carriage springs and the rustle of silk every time the carriage sways around the bend. Through the window the town passes by in fragments. A garden wall, a gate, a woman sweeping a step, a dog asleep in a patch of sun, and Penelope watches it all with the strange, heightened attention of someone who knows that the next time she sees these streets she'll be seeing them as a different person. And here's the thing that gets me about this ride. It's 12 minutes. 12 minutes between the house where she grew up and the church where she'll be married. 12 minutes between the last morning she'll wake up as her father's daughter and the first afternoon she'll spend as someone's wife. It's nothing. It's a blink. And it's everything. Because inside those 12 minutes, inside that creaking, swaying, silent carriage, Penelope is suspended between two lives, belonging fully to neither. And I think that might be the loneliest 12 minutes a person can spend, even with both your parents sitting right beside you. The carriage stops. The church door is closed. Inside she can hear the murmur of voices, the shuffle of people settling into pews, the occasional cough. A sexton opens the door and they step into the vestibule, that small cold space between the outside world and the nave, between the ordinary Thursday morning and the thing that's about to happen. Frederick is here. He's been waiting in the vestry with the groomsmen, and now he steps forward, and Penelope sees him, and for 1 second, just one, the rules and the protocol and the careful choreography of the morning fall away, and there's nothing but his face and her face and the small involuntary thing that happens to her breathing when she looks at him. Then the choreography resumes. William takes Penelope's arm. Frederick stands on the other side. The bridesmaids and groomsmen line up behind them in couples, and they walk, slowly together, down the aisle of the parish church at Wenford, past the pews full of faces she's known her whole life, past the stone pillars and the stained glass windows and the candles that someone lit an hour ago, toward the altar where the clergyman is standing with his book open and his hands folded, waiting. The ceremony is quiet. It's not dramatic. It's not even particularly long. The clergyman reads the words. Frederick and Penelope make their responses, and then there's a moment, the moment that I can't stop thinking about. Frederick removes his right-hand glove. He does it himself, pulling it off finger by finger, because the groom's glove is his own responsibility. But Penelope doesn't remove hers, she can't. Her hands are full, one holding her bouquet of white flowers, the other held out toward the first bridesmaid, who steps forward and slips the loosened button free and draws the left glove gently off Penelope's hand, exposing the bare ring finger, and the clergyman takes the ring from Frederick, and Frederick takes Penelope's hand. Her bare hand. The first time he's ever touched her skin without a layer of kid leather between them, and he slides the ring onto her finger. That touch. I keep coming back to it. 5 months of gloved hands. 5 months of the width of a comfortable breath between two bodies on a dance floor. 5 months of nods and bows and calling cards and conversations about the weather. And now, here, in front of everyone they've ever known, he touches her hand skin to skin for the first time, and the ring goes on, and it's done. They're married. The walk back up the aisle is different from the walk down. It's faster, lighter. The organ is playing something Penelope won't remember. The faces in the pews are smiling. Frederick's hand is under her arm, and she can feel the warmth of it through the silk of her sleeve, and the church door opens, and the October light comes flooding in, pale and golden and full of the particular clarity that autumn gives to everything it touches. Last. The bride is always last. She arrives at the church after everyone else is already seated, already waiting, already watching the door. Her entrance is the final entrance. It's the one the whole morning has been building toward. And it has to be last because that's how stories work, isn't it? The most important thing comes at the end. You don't put the answer before the question. You don't light the candle before the room is dark. The carriage ride to the church takes 12 minutes. Penelope sits between Henrietta and William. Nobody talks. The only sound is the horses' hooves on the road and the creak of the carriage springs, and there's a rustle of silk every time the carriage sways around a bend. Through the window the town passes by in fragments. A garden wall, a gate, a woman sweeping a step, a dog asleep in a patch of sun, and Penelope watches it all with the strange, heightened attention of someone who knows that the next time she sees these streets she'll be seeing them as a different person. And here's the thing that gets me about this ride. It's 12 minutes. 12 minutes between the house where she grew up and the church where she'll be married. 12 minutes between the last morning she'll wake up as her father's daughter and the first afternoon she'll spend as someone's wife. It's nothing. It's a blink. And it's everything, because inside those 12 minutes, inside that creaking, swaying, silent carriage, Penelope is suspended between two lives, belonging fully to neither. And I think that might be the loneliest 12 minutes a person can spend, even with both your parents sitting right beside you. The carriage stops. The church door is closed. Inside she can hear the murmur of voices, the shuffle of people settling into pews, the occasional cough. A sexton opens the door and they step into the vestibule. That small cold space between the outside world and the nave, between the ordinary Thursday morning and the thing that's about to happen. Frederick is here. He's been waiting in the vestry with the groomsmen, and now he steps forward, and Penelope sees him. And for 1 second or so, just one, the rules and the protocol and the careful choreography of the morning fall away, and there's nothing but his face and her face, and the small involuntary thing that happens to her breathing when she looks at him. Then the choreography resumes. William takes Penelope's arm. Frederick stands on the other side. The bridesmaids and groomsmen line up behind them in couples. And they walk, slowly together, down the aisle of the parish church at Wenford, past the pews full of faces she's known her whole life, past the stone pillars and the stained glass windows and the candles that someone lit an hour ago, toward the altar where the clergyman is standing with his book open and his hands folded, waiting. The ceremony is quiet. It's not dramatic. It's not even particularly long. The clergyman reads the words. Frederick and Penelope make their responses, and then there's a moment, the moment that I can't stop thinking about. Frederick removes his right-hand glove. He does it himself, pulling it off finger by finger, because the groom's glove is his own responsibility. But Penelope doesn't remove hers. She can't. Her hands are full, and one holding her bouquet of white flowers, the other held out toward the first bridesmaid, who steps forward and slips the loosened button free and draws the left glove gently off Penelope's hand, exposing the bare ring finger. And the clergyman takes the ring from Frederick, and Frederick takes Penelope's hand, or her bare hand, the first time that he's ever touched her skin without a layer of kid leather between them, and he slides the ring onto her finger. That touch. I keep coming back to it. 5 months of gloved hands. 5 months of the width of a comfortable breath between two bodies on a dance floor. 5 months of nods and bows and calling cards and conversations about the weather. And now, here, in front of everyone they've ever known, he touches her hand, skin to skin for the first time, and the ring goes on. And it's done. They're married. The walk back up the aisle is different from the walk down. It's faster, lighter. The organ is playing something Penelope won't remember. The faces in the pews are smiling. Frederick's hand is under her arm, and she can feel the warmth of it through the silk of her sleeve, and the church door opens, and the October light comes flooding in, pale and golden, and full of the particular clarity that autumn gives to everything it touches. They step outside. The air is cool. There are people on the church path and neighbours, well-wishers, a few children who have come to watch, and someone throws something, dried petals maybe, or grain, and it catches in the veil and in the orange blossoms and falls around them like snow that isn't cold. Back at the Graves house, a breakfast has been laid. That's what they call it, a wedding breakfast, even though it's nearly noon and nobody's had anything resembling breakfast since 6 in the morning. The dining room has been opened up, the good tablecloth spread, the silver candlesticks brought out even though it's the middle of the day. There are cold meats and fruit and cake, the wedding cake, wrapped in white paper and tied with white ribbon, pieces of which will later be boxed up and sent to friends who couldn't attend, each one a small edible souvenir of the day. Penelope's parents speak to her first. That's the order. Parents, then close relatives, then everyone else. Henrietta takes both of Penelope's hands and holds them for a moment without speaking, and what passes between them isn't words. It's something older than words, something that lives in the grip of a mother's fingers and the steadiness of a daughter's gaze. And then Henrietta lets go and steps back, and the other guests come forward, one by one, and Penelope receives them all with a composure that would have made the etiquette books proud, except she isn't thinking about the etiquette books anymore. She isn't thinking about rules. She's standing in her parents' dining room in a white dress, with a ring on her finger, and she's thinking, this is real. This actually happened. This morning I was a girl in a bed in the dark, and now I'm here, and everything before this morning already feels like it belongs to someone else. There's no dancing. There's no music. That isn't done at weddings anymore, or at least not at weddings like this one. The guests eat, they talk, they congratulate. The hour named on the invitation cards arrives, and one by one, quietly, the guests begin to leave. Nobody lingers. That would suggest they didn't have anywhere else to be. And then, sooner than she expected, sooner than seems possible, Penelope is upstairs again in her room, and Sally is unbuttoning the 24 silk-covered buttons down her back, one by one, and the white dress is coming off, and the orange blossoms are being unpinned, and the veil is being folded, and in their place Sally is helping her into a travelling dress of dark grey, practical, anonymous. The kind of dress you could wear on a train and nobody would look at you twice. Because that's the last rule, and it might be the strangest one of all. The moment you leave the church, the moment the ceremony's done, you're supposed to become invisible again. No more white, no more flowers, nothing that identifies you as a bride. You put on your plain dress and your close bonnet, and you step into the carriage and you travel to wherever you're going, and if anyone on the train or in the coaching inn looks at you, they should see nothing but an ordinary woman in a grey dress, unremarkable, unnoticeable, already absorbed back into the world as though the morning never happened. The first carriage is waiting. Penelope and Frederick climb in, and her parents climb in behind them. The bride and groom leave with the bride's parents. That's the way it's done. Though by now the ways feel less like rules and more like the steps of a dance she's been learning her whole life. A dance she could do in her sleep. A dance she's only now realising she'll never have to do again in quite the same way. The carriage door closes, the horse begins to walk, and inside the carriage, in the small, warm, enclosed space that smells of silk and orange blossoms and the faint, clean scent of a man's freshly pressed coat, Penelope sits with her hands in her lap and her ring on her finger, and her veil still falling softly over her shoulders, and she doesn't say anything, and Frederick doesn't say anything, and Henrietta and William don't say anything, and the silence is not the careful governed silence of the drawing room or the street or the church. It's a different kind of silence. It's the silence of something that's been completed. The carriage turns onto the road. The church grows smaller behind them. The October sun falls in long gold bars through the window and across the white silk and across Penelope's hands, the left one bare now, the ring catching the light, the glove folded in her lap never to be put on again. She closes her eyes. The carriage sways. The horse walks on. So that's where we'll leave her. In a carriage on a road in the October light, with a ring on her finger and a glove folded in her lap and the whole of her old life growing smaller behind her. I keep thinking about that glove, the left one, the one the bridesmaid slipped off at the altar so the ring could go on. She won't put it back on. She doesn't need to. The glove was part of the old rules, the rules of distance, of composure, of never letting anyone touch you without a layer of something between your skin and theirs. And now the ring is there instead, and the ring says something different. The ring says someone reached through all of it, through the silk and the etiquette and the silence and the calling cards and the careful distance, and found her. That's the whole story, really. Not the rules, not the ball, not the bonnet or the orange blossoms or the 14-minute morning visits. Those are the scaffolding. The story is simpler than that. It's about a feeling that had to travel through layers of whalebone and protocol and self-control to reach the surface. And it got there anyway. It always does. It always has. The rules couldn't stop it. They just made it quieter and slower. And, I think, more beautiful for the waiting. There are people who lived like this. Real people in real towns, in real drawing rooms and real churchyards, holding real dance cards and writing real letters and folding real calling cards and standing in real churches in real white silk. We don't know their names. Most of them didn't leave any record behind except the lives they lived and the children they raised and the houses they kept and the small invisible acts of patience and discipline and sheer love that held everything together. But they were here. They were real. And tonight, for a little while, we stood beside one of them and watched her move through the world she was given, with all its rules and all its silence. And I hope you felt what she felt. The nervousness, the waiting, the warmth of a sleeve close enough to touch but not quite touching, the extraordinary difficulty of showing nothing while feeling everything. If any of that stayed with you, if there's a moment from tonight that you're still thinking about, a detail that caught you, something that reminded you of your own life or your own heart, I'd love it if you left a word or two below, where you're listening from, what you were thinking. There's no hurry. It can wait until morning. And if you'd like to come back for another evening like this one, you're welcome here. We'll keep going, slowly, quietly, one story at a time. Medieval kitchens, ancient temples, Victorian parlours. There's no shortage of quiet lives to visit, no shortage of candles to sit beside. We're building this channel the way Penelope built her trousseau, one stitch at a time, one evening at a time, and we're grateful for every person who chooses to be here. So thank you for tonight, for listening, for staying. And now, let whatever's left of this story settle over you, the way the October light settled over that carriage on the road. Let it get warm. Let it get heavy. Let your eyes close if they haven't already. Sleep well.